Inside Plaszów, how one man turned authority into terror. When people think of the Nazi system, they often picture massive machinery, orders flowing from Berlin, faceless bureaucracy, and distant decision-makers. But history is not only shaped by systems, it is shaped by individuals who chose how far they were willing to go once power was placed in their hands. Amon Göth was one of those individuals. He was not a battlefield general or a famous political leader. He ruled a single camp near Krakow. Yet within that small territory, he exercised near absolute control over life and death. Survivors did not remember him as a man enforcing policy. They remembered him as a presence, unpredictable, volatile, and terrifying. This is not a story about ideology alone. It is a story about what happens when unchecked authority meets personal cruelty, and how ordinary structures can be twisted into instruments of personal domination. To understand Amon Göth is to confront one of the darkest expressions of power in modern history. Amon Leopold Göth was born on December 11, 1908, in Vienna, Austria, into a relatively comfortable middle-class family. His parents were strict Catholics who valued order, discipline, and social standing. His father ran a respected publishing business, and expectations were clear. Göth was supposed to inherit stability, not seek chaos. But from an early age, Göth rejected that path. He was not interested in books or commerce. What drew him instead was authority, movements that promised strength, identity, and dominance during a time when Europe was still destabilized after World War I. As a teenager, he gravitated toward extremist politics, eventually joining the Austrian Nazi movement in the mid-1920s, long before it became a ruling force. At that stage, the Nazi Party operated illegally in Austria. Göth's early involvement included underground activities such as weapons smuggling and courier work. These experiences hardened him. They also rewarded him with a sense of belonging and purpose rooted in obedience and aggression. By the early 1930s, Göth moved through several Nazi organizations and formally joined the SS in 1931. The SS was not simply a military unit. It was an ideological institution designed to cultivate loyalty without question. Göth fit perfectly. He demonstrated commitment, ambition, and a willingness to act without hesitation. As the Nazi state expanded, Göth's responsibilities grew. He worked within SS units associated with camp administration and internal security, absorbing both logistical training and ideological conditioning. This combination, technical authority fused with radical belief, would later prove devastating. After Austria's annexation in 1938, Göth participated in actions against Jewish communities, overseeing arrests and property seizures. These activities normalized cruelty and reinforced a belief that his actions were justified by the system that empowered him. By late 1942, Nazi leadership escalated its campaign of systematic destruction across occupied Europe. Camps were expanded, new ones created, and existing structures repurposed for mass exploitation and elimination. It was during this phase that Göth was selected for a role that would define his legacy. In early 1943, he was assigned to oversee the creation and operation of the Plaszów labor camp, located just outside Krakow. When Göth arrived, the camp was still under construction. Prisoners were already being used to build the infrastructure that would later confine them. From the beginning, Göth treated Plaszów not as an administrative assignment, but as a personal domain. He positioned himself as a ruler rather than a manager. His authority was immediate, visible, and absolute. One of his first major actions was overseeing the liquidation of the Krakow ghetto in March 1943. This operation was characterized by speed, confusion, and extreme force. Families were separated without warning. Decisions were made instantly, often based on nothing more than proximity or perceived inconvenience. Following this, Plaszów evolved into a place governed less by written rules and more by fear. Prisoners were never certain which actions might result in punishment. The unpredictability itself became a tool of control. Göth frequently appeared during roll calls or work details, observing silently before issuing sudden commands. Survivors recalled that selections could occur without explanation. The lack of consistency ensured constant psychological strain. Conditions within the camp were severe. Overcrowding, inadequate sanitation, and insufficient food weakened the population. Disease spread rapidly. These hardships were not accidental. They were tolerated, and in some cases encouraged, as mechanisms of control. Guth's personal behavior amplified this environment. He kept trained dogs that he used to intimidate and terrorize prisoners. Guards under his command often mirrored his conduct, understanding that cruelty aligned with leadership expectations. Beyond physical hardship, the camp imposed relentless psychological pressure. The absence of predictability stripped prisoners of any sense of agency. Survival became a matter of chance rather than compliance. As the war shifted against Germany, efforts began to conceal evidence of mass destruction. At Plaszów, Guth oversaw operations designed to eliminate physical traces of previous actions. Prisoners were forced to exhume mass burial sites and destroy evidence under constant supervision. These operations were structured to leave no witnesses. Those assigned to the work were eventually removed and replaced, ensuring silence. Meanwhile, Guth lived in relative luxury near the camp. His residence was furnished with items taken from confiscated property. He hosted gatherings and enjoyed comforts unavailable even to many within the Nazi hierarchy. One prisoner assigned to work in his household later testified to the constant fear that accompanied proximity to him. His moods were volatile. Violence could erupt without warning. This behavior was widely known, not hidden. Even within the Nazi system, Guth's conduct began to attract attention, not for moral reasons, but for corruption. He diverted valuables intended for state use, engaged in unauthorized dealings, and abused labor for personal benefit. In September 1944, the SS arrested Guth on charges related to theft and misuse of authority. It was a rare move, reflecting concern over control rather than conscience. However, internal proceedings stalled as the war collapsed around them. Guth never faced full accountability under the regime he served. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, Guth was captured by Allied forces and transferred to Polish authorities. Evidence gathered from survivors, documents, and former personnel formed a comprehensive case. His trial began in Krakow in August 1946. Testimonies detailed not only policy enforcement, but personal decisions that resulted in immense suffering. Guth defended himself by claiming obedience to orders, a defense increasingly rejected in post-war courts. The verdict was clear. He was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. On September 13, 1946, Guth was executed in Krakow, the same city where he once exercised unchecked power. Amon Guth was not an anomaly created in isolation. He was a product of a system that rewarded obedience and tolerated cruelty. Yet he also made choices that went beyond necessity. His story forces an uncomfortable question. How much of history is driven by structure, and how much by individual will? The legacy of Plaszów remains as a reminder that power, when detached from accountability, can become deeply personal and profoundly destructive. Today, the site stands as a memorial, not only to those who suffered there, but as a warning. Understanding figures like Guth is not about revisiting horror for its own sake. It is about recognizing how ordinary paths can lead to extraordinary harm when authority is left unchecked. History remembers not only what was done, but who chose to do it.